When you are close to releasing something, it never feels like there's a good time to share an update for it unless you're pretty much finished with what you're working on.
Alright then, keep your secrets.
For the past year and a half, I've been working on this turn-based roguelike dungeon crawler during my free time, and let's just say it's been way more work than I originally thought it was going to be. An oversimplification of the main gameplay loop is you spawn into a randomly generated room, kill all the enemies or die. If there's a chest, open it, you can select a relic, and then go to the next room. Not to pat myself on the back or anything, but I've got quite a bit done over the last couple months. So much so that I've released a new demo that you can play right now. If you played the demo way back in February of this year, you can probably tell that the new version revamps pretty much every major system in the game. So if you have some time, head over to the Steam page and give the demo a try. One of the things I'm most excited for in this version of the demo is that I've started working on adding Steam integrations into the game, the first of which is a leaderboard integration where it tracks the quickest times for completing floor 30 in the demo, so good luck trying to beat DK Summit's score. Also, if you're familiar with the channel or the game, you might have noticed that I changed the name from Penumbra Tower to Dungeon Croaker. I don't have anything against Penumbra Tower, this change was mainly because Penumbra Tower is a very hard name to remember, and doesn't really explain anything about the game, and certainly isn't helping me as a keyword either. So for these reasons, the game will now be referred to as Dungeon Croaker, like Dungeon Crawler but Croaker because you're a frog. Just so we're all up to speed, the previous devlog went over adding new relic art for the existing relics, adding item rarity weights, moving all the original enemies over to the new ability system, enemy spawn weights, and adding a rest floor where players can upgrade their relics. Okay, 2,000 years ago, I promised that I would add controller support. What I didn't know was the amount of work needed to move everything over to Unity's new input system. You see, because everything was controlled through mouse interactions originally, moving tiles, attacking enemies, destroying obstacles, and clicking on chests, you get the idea. So because of this, I was using raycasts based off of the mouse position for everything, but with a controller, mouse position isn't a thing, unless your gamepad is using a virtual mouse, but that's a whole other thing that I don't want to get into. Anyways, on top of assigning all the keybinds to the new input system, I needed to rewrite how most of my interactions worked, which also included all my UI elements, which means all of the relic cards and buttons needed to be swapped away from mouse over events as well. There were also some other issues, I'm sure, but I didn't document the process well enough, so those problems are lost to time. So the moral of the story is, decide if your game is going to have controller support early on and build around that. So this is how I got around the diagonal movement issue. Moving the left joystick in any direction will move you in that direction. If the specified tile is blocked by an obstacle or enemy, you will attack whatever is on that tile. If the tile is occupied by a chest or a door, you will interact with it instead. These sort of instant interactions help speed up with gameplay on the controller because it feels noticeably slower than using a mouse. However, because doing diagonal movement this way is going to suck, I've added another way to interact with tiles. Your right joystick controls a highlight that the player can use to interact with specific tiles by pressing the south button on whatever gamepad you're using. In my opinion, after testing the game many times, I still prefer using a mouse over controller. In any game that has a grid system, horizontal movement is always challenging for a joystick, but at the end of the day, it's really up to your own preference. I wanted to even out the relic list a little more, so for this demo, I added 14 new relics. 4 of which are corrupted relics, which are new to this version of the game. Corrupted relics can only be found on corrupted floors, which have a very low chance of spawning. These relics usually have an upside and a downside. So as you can see here, I haven't created a tile map for this floor yet. The only thing I have done is made this demon looking chest thing that I'm not entirely happy with right now, so I might end up changing it in the future when I work on the rest of the tile map. But in the corrupted chest you can find the Bulltoad's Brew, which will increase your damage multiplier by 100% but cut your life in half. The Satanic Switchblade, which duplicates your attacks but cuts your attack damage in half. The Igneous Powder, which will drop a bomb whenever you land a killing blow on an enemy. And finally, the Botanical Embodiment, which applies your attack damage multiplier to your Thorns damage instead of your attacks. I don't think I'm going to go through all of the 10 other regular relics that I worked on, because I think it would be more fun if you found them as you played through the demo, but I will let you know about this one because it's tied to a new status effect. So the
Macabre
Mask is a new relic that has a chance to apply fear stacks to enemies. When an enemy's stacks reach 2, they become feared, causing them to run around in a panic for 6 turns. On a similar note, I've been working on weapons, which is also something that's somewhat new to this version of the demo. The previous demo allowed the player to place bombs onto nearby tiles. I've expanded this system to include additional weapons. Now, the short sword is no longer a relic but a weapon item. The short sword weapon type slashes 3 adjacent tiles near the player. When activated, the player enters a weapon attack state where you can use the mouse or joystick to aim the sword to target specific tiles. The bomb weapon functions similarly to the sword, however you only need to select one of the available tiles to place the bomb. Weapon attacks have an additional 50% damage multiplier attached to them, causing them to do more damage than the regular attacks. But you cannot consistently use weapon attacks. Every time you use a weapon, it depletes some of your spirit, which is a new resource I added just for this. But that's okay, the player can regain spirit by landing attacks on enemies. Weapon attacks do take relic effects into account, so they will do things like scale with relic damage, apply status effects, and increase combo points, amongst other things. It's also important to note that because this is a brand new system that I added very recently, the player is restricted to only the bomb and the short sword for now. However, in future versions I plan to add a variety of weapons that can be swapped out. For a while now, the forest room has had water tiles, however they were never really hazard tiles because they didn't actually do anything, which I was kind of okay with because the forest room is the starting area and it's meant to be a little easy, but it also didn't really make any sense that they didn't do anything at all. So because of this, when you step on a water tile now, you get a wet debuff applied to you. The wet debuff does a couple of things. For one, it removes burning from units, and additionally, it makes freezing stacks twice as effective. So now if you apply a freezing stack to a wet unit, they will be frozen instantly instead of requiring 2 turns. I also thought about having the water tiles spread the shock status effect to any unit that's standing in connected water, but I decided it was too much work for the demo. Since we're talking about debuff effects, one small thing that I added was that enemies can now have immunities to certain debuffs. So for example, the pikeman is now immune to freezing and the skirmisher is immune to bleeding. I mainly did this as a way to get players to try a larger variety of relics rather than just upgrading a single relic all the way during a playthrough. So as I mentioned, I needed to migrate the boss mechanics over to the new ability system that I worked on previously. Because of this, I decided to give the boss a couple updates. So now the slime boss has an almost completely new set of abilities that makes the fight more challenging compared to the original version back in February. Also, because of the additional immunities, the slime boss has been moved to the volcanic environment, making this fight even more challenging for the player now that you need to manage dodging the boss's attacks as well as not stepping on any lava tiles. Burning immunity is not the only thing that the boss has. It's also immune to any sort of CC, so stunning, freezing, and fearing will not work either. I'm also not going to go in depth on the new abilities that the boss has, as once again, I don't really want to spoil too much of the demo's content. Something else that has come up a lot in the comments is what I'm doing with the soundtrack for this game, and this is probably the only part of the game that I am not working on myself. Flowerhead has been working on the music for the game on and off for a couple months now. I haven't really shown any of the background music in any of the previous devlogs because I usually just mute the gameplay clip while I'm talking over it, but the plan is eventually that each environment will have its own theme. Right now there's only one track for the forest area that I'm just looping over the entire demo for now, but eventually we will have something unique for the desert, volcanic, and any other future environments that I end up making. Flowerhead also has a royalty-free music project that you can use for stuff. I use it for background music in most of my devlogs. I'll leave a link in the description for it if you want to check it out. I also did a whole bunch of other small changes and bug fixes that I'm not going to go over in this devlog. I'm getting to the point that there isn't too much new programming that I need to do with the game. There are a couple systems that I still need to set up, like a cosmetic meta progression system that I want to add in, character selection, Steam achievements, localization, and some other stuff. But other than that, it's probably going to be adding more content to the game itself, meaning more environments, more enemies, relics, weapons, bosses, and so on. Which I think is good because honestly, I feel like I've been working on the game for too long at this point. Not that I don't like working on Dungeon Croaker, I think the game is in a really good spot right now, but I also have ideas for other games pouring out of my head. So I think the plan is I'm going to try to finish the game sometime in 2025, fingers crossed. Aside from that, once again, go ahead and give the demo a try, and if you want to keep up to date on what I'm working on, there's a greetable Discord where I sometimes post updates on what I'm doing. There's also a channel there for reporting bugs if you find anything while playing.